Today we're going to take a brief look at the Tudor line of English monarchs. The Tudor family is one of the most influential and interesting families in history. Their story begins with the War of the Roses. The War of the Roses is a series of civil wars between 1455 and 1487 fought between two branches of the royal family, the House of York and the House of Lancaster. It is called the War of the Roses because the emblem of the House of York was a white rose and the emblem of the Lancaster family was a red rose. The war ended at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485, when leader of the Lancasters, Henry Tudor, defeated the forces of King Richard III. Richard was killed in battle, and his crown was found under a bush and placed on Henry's head. Henry Tudor was from the Lancaster or the Red Rose side. He will eventually marry Edward IV's daughter from the York or the White Rose side, and the War of the Roses would come to an end with the uniting of the two families. Henry Tudor would become Henry VII, the first in the Tudor line of English monarchs, and rules from 1485 to 1509. When Henry comes to the throne, England is in poor financial shape because of the 100 Years' War and the War of the Roses, so his reign is known for its high taxes. Henry will cement an alliance with Spain when his oldest son, Arthur, marries Catherine of Aragon, the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, the King and Queen of Spain. But Arthur, only 15 years old, dies 4 months into the marriage. Not wanting to lose the alliance with Spain, Henry VII had the Pope agree to let his second son marry the widowed Catherine. In 1509, Henry VII dies, and our second Tudor monarch takes the throne. Henry VIII would rule from 1509 to 1547. Henry became popular when he lowered the high taxes from his father. But those high taxes made the family very wealthy. Henry is best known for his many wives. Let's look at each one. Henry's first wife was his widowed ex-sister-in-law, Catherine of Aragon. If you'll remember, Catherine was the daughter of the King and Queen of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella, the same Ferdinand and Isabella that sponsored the voyages of Columbus. Henry and Catherine would only have one child, Mary I. Catherine would have several miscarriages. But because Catherine could never produce a male heir, Henry decided that he wanted a divorce. He asked the Pope to grant a divorce, but Catherine had very wealthy family members. Catherine's nephew was Charles V, who was the Holy Roman Emperor, the King of Spain, Archduke of Austria, and the Lord of the Netherlands. So the Pope was against the divorce. Henry had also fallen in love with the younger Anne Boleyn and was determined to divorce Catherine. Henry's solution was to establish a new Protestant Church of England named the Church of England. This new church, with Henry as its leader, granted permission to divorce Catherine and marry Anne Boleyn. This move from the Catholic Church to the Church of England is called the English Reformation. Catherine would remain on house arrest for the rest of her life and died within 2 years of the divorce. Henry's second wife was Anne Boleyn. Henry and Anne only had one child, Elizabeth I. Anne also had several miscarriages and could never produce a male heir. Henry had Anne Boleyn arrested for treason, incest, and witchcraft, and had her beheaded. Henry's third wife was Jane Seymour. Jane was able to give Henry what he wanted so desperately, a male heir, when she gave birth to Edward. Jane died a few days after giving birth to Henry's only male heir. Henry's fourth wife was Anne of Cleves. Henry had agreed to marry Anne without seeing her and sent her home within a few months of the wedding. Henry's fifth wife was Catherine Howard. Catherine was Catholic and was young and vivacious, and at this time Henry was old and fat. She didn't want to marry him and had an affair. Henry had her beheaded for adultery. Henry's sixth wife was Catherine Parr. This last wife outlived Henry. She had 4 husbands total. She was close to all 3 of Henry's children and helped to be a peacemaker between them and Henry. Henry would die in 1547 at the age of 55. Edward VI would be the third Tudor monarch. He would reign from 1547 to 1553. Edward was the son of Jane Seymour, Henry's third wife. Edward was only 9 years old when he became king and raised to be a staunch Protestant. Edward was sickly his whole life and died at age 15 of tuberculosis. Protestant Edward was afraid that after his death, his sister Mary would return the country to Catholicism. So before his death, he named his cousin, Lady Jane Grey, to be his successor. This would leave 2 claiming the throne of England. Edward's Protestant cousin, Lady Jane Grey, was the granddaughter of Henry VII and was set to be queen. She was awaiting coronation in the Tower of London, but Mary was very popular among the people, and she raised an army and ended Lady Jane's reign after only 9 days. Mary would have her 16-year-old cousin and 9-day queen beheaded. The fourth Tudor monarch was Mary I. Mary reigned from 1553 to 1558. Mary was a devout Catholic and wanted to turn England back to Catholicism. She would marry the King of Spain, Philip II. Philip was very wealthy and powerful. He held lands on every continent. The sun never set on his empire. He had one of the largest empires in history. In Mary's attempt to turn the nation back to Catholicism, many were killed and earned her the nickname Bloody Mary, as she burnt hundreds of Protestants at the stake. But Mary died at a very young age, only 42, and only reigned for 5 years. The fifth and last Tudor monarch was Queen Elizabeth I. Queen Elizabeth reigned from 1558 to 1603. Queen Elizabeth was the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Elizabeth had two famous nicknames. One was Good Queen Bess, which showed how the people beloved her, and the second was the Virgin Queen, because Elizabeth never married. Elizabeth was a Protestant, and there were many assassination attempts on her life from Catholics wanting to turn the country back to Catholicism. Elizabeth's Catholic cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots, was arrested and imprisoned after an attempt was made on Elizabeth's life to make Mary the queen. Eventually, Elizabeth had Mary beheaded. During Elizabeth's 45-year reign, the Church of England was firmly established. Art and literature flourished under Queen Elizabeth. William Shakespeare's plays were written during Elizabeth's reign. Elizabeth's power would grow even more in 1588 when England defeated the Spanish Armada. Philip II, the King of Spain, would send 130 ships to invade England. But the fleet was met with disaster as the smaller and quicker English ships defeated the Great Armada, and storms destroyed much of the Spanish fleet. England began to colonize America under Elizabeth with the explorations of Francis Drake and Walter Raleigh. Walter Raleigh would name Virginia after Queen Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen. Elizabeth died at the age of 67, leaving no heir. The throne would go to the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, James I. The Tudor line of kings died with Elizabeth, but Elizabeth would go down in history as one of the greatest monarchs in the history of the world.